If you accidentally leave £600 million out for the bin men, can you get that back from the tip, or does it now belong to the council? Well, this was one of the issues in a case that reported yesterday, and it throws up all sorts of interesting legal conundra, including what is property. But let me explain the background to this. Back in 2009, Mr. Howells started to engage in Bitcoin mining. Now, to oversimplify how that works, effectively the idea is that Bitcoin is meant to be analogous to, say, mining for gold or some other sort of precious and finite resource. And, you know, the idea that gold is worth money because it's hard to get and there's a limited supply of it. So Bitcoin is meant to be an electronic analogue of that. You mine all through sort of electronic stuff and algorithms and all that sort of thing. And some people will be rewarded by, you know, mining Bitcoin. So this guy did this. And ended up with 8,000 Bitcoin. So it was, you know, at the time, this was perhaps not as big a thing as it is now, but he had 8,000 Bitcoin. Now, where does Bitcoin live? I mean, Bitcoin is effectively, it's all done through something called the blockchain on the internet that records how many Bitcoin a person has. But it's all anonymized. I mean, that's one of the things that people like about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. The idea is that nobody really knows, only you know, you know, whether you own it or not. But how do you actually, you know, use Bitcoin? Well, you have something called a private key. And the private key is an alphanumeric string. I mean, effectively, it's a bit like a password or your PIN number, you know, for the bank. And that allows the person who's got that private key to transact Bitcoin online. They can use that to say, okay, I want to transfer this Bitcoin to these other people. I want to transfer it to cash. I want to buy something with it. So you need this private key. And that private key, like I say, it's just an alphanumeric string. And this gentleman, he just kept that key on the hard drive on his laptop. Now, obviously, you know, over time he upgraded. He got rid of that laptop, but he took the hard drive out. He took the hard drive out that had the key on it, and he put it in a drawer. And he did occasionally access it, just plugging it into another computer, because he had other things on there as well, other documents, and you know, that he wanted to keep onto. And he put it in a drawer, marked with a bit of gaffer tape on top, going, you know, this is my Bitcoin hard drive. But he had another hard drive in there that was just like, you know, salvaged from another laptop. You can guess what's going to happen here. He decided one day to have a tidy up, and maybe this is a cautionary tale, why you should never tidy up. And he put both hard drives into some bin liners, which he left for the rubbish tip. Now, he actually asked his partner, his missus, he said, do you mind dropping those off at the tip? And apparently she said, no, she wouldn't be able to do it. So he said, well, never mind, you know, I'll take it to the tip myself. Then, according to him, he sort of overnight went, oh, hang on a minute. I better check that I haven't actually, you know, thrown away that hard drive. I'll do it in the morning. Well, you can guess what happened. His missus actually, it turned out, she sort of said, oh, you know, actually have got enough time. So she dropped everything off down the tip. Now, it seems a little bit unclear what happened after then, but apparently in 2013, when Bitcoin sort of started to really peak, he suddenly remembered and went, oh, what about my hard drive? I've got that. So he started, like, you know, rooting through his drawers and he couldn't find it. And he suddenly realised and remembered it's been thrown out. Now, he went to a lot of effort to identify what might have happened to his hard drive. And with much research, eventually he was able to say, like, work out that it had been located, taken to a particular tip belonging to Newport Council. And he actually sort of narrowed down whereabouts it might be. Because, you know, the council do record where they sort of dump stuff, you know, in their landfills. And he narrowed it down to an area of about 2,000 square metres. Now, obviously, it's sort of three-dimensional because people start dumping stuff on top. And he said it's somewhere in that pile of 10 to 15,000 cubic metres of rubbish that's all buried under there. So he approached the council and said, I'd like to get my hard drive back. And, you know, he offered to pay and all sorts of things and offered them deals to split the cash, you know, when he was able to recover it. But the council said no, because they said, look, apart from anything else, under all the environmental regulations, particularly the Control of Pollution Act, which actually dictates how councils use landfills, they said once it's in there, we can't dig it out again. We'd need to apply to the Environment Agency for a special permit to go routing through. I mean, sometimes to do this, it has happened in criminal investigations where they've worked out that sort of things have been dumped in tips, including sort of, people. And they obviously, in those circumstances, they will locate and they will have special operations to go in and recover stuff. But they said, we're not going in just to get your hard drive back, because it'd be a major operation. It'd be quite dangerous to actually do. Landfills aren't the most stable environments. And I said, what about all the neighbours? They're not going to be very happy if we've got to go in there and dig all this up, and there's all, more pollution and, risk of landslips. And, the fact is, once it's sort of padded down, we spray it all with cheap perfume and everything. So they said, no, we're not going to do it. So he brought actually a claim against the council, and he did it under 3 heads of claim, and they're quite interesting because at least one of them is probably just made up. A proprietary restitutionary claim, an equitable proprietary claim, and a claim for a declaration that the claimant is the legal owner of the hard drive and all tangible and intangible property on it, together with either an order for delivery up of the hard drive or damages for wrongful retention. The council applied to strike out the claim, and that's what this judgment is about. And you can strike out the claim if either it's just wrong as a matter of law, or you can also go for what they call summary judgment, which is, instead of having a trial, you say, okay, we will assume everything the claimant says is correct, even if we don't actually accept that. But we'll say, for the purposes of this exercise, we'll assume that everything you say is correct and you can prove it. But even if that is so, you would still lose at trial. So this was actually put in on, both heads as a strikeout and a request for summary judgment. Actually, the judge pointed out and said they pretty much just put on the form, we just want, think this claim shouldn't go ahead. Just as a little aside, you've got to be very careful there. There was a great judgment once that sort of said, such and such people, such and such party was very successful in their succeeded in obtaining summary judgment in a case. Unfortunately, that's not what they'd applied for. They'd applied for a strikeout. And because they hadn't put that on the form, they had to go back and redo it. That was overturned on appeal. And they said, I know it's a bit silly because we know what the end result is going to be, but yeah, you have to go through all the motions again. So if you are applying ever to strike out or summary judgment, put both on the claim form. It's the same price, it's the same fee, whether you do one or the other. So you may as well put both. So say this is an application for strikeout stroke summary judgment. So the judge heard all this, and quite a few of the issues was, first of all, what exactly was he claiming back? Because he was saying, I'm claiming back my Bitcoin. Now, in law, we effectively have 2 types of property. We have tangible property, real things like, land, houses, motor vehicles, jewellery, whatever. There's also intangible property. So that could be things like, intellectual property rights. The right to have an easement across somebody's land, something like that. But also, this crops up with, finances. Obviously, a suitcase full of money is tangible property, but electronic numbers on, running your bank account, that's intangible. It's what we call a chose in action. But what they said here is actually Bitcoin sort of falls between both. And in another case, which I won't go into unless people are desperate for me to do in the comments, they actually analysed how Bitcoin works. And they said, really, it's in a sort of third category. It's sort of intangible, but it doesn't quite fit in the intangible stuff. I don't see that myself. I can't see why Bitcoin is any different from any other electronic ledger that tells people how much they have. I don't see why it's different that it's Bitcoin as opposed to just, you've got the cash machine and say, what's my balance? Anyway, the court thought otherwise. But they said, well, the Bitcoin hasn't been buried. The Bitcoin still exists because by definition, intangible property can't really have a location. It's just a sort of a nebulous sort of, concept. So I said, yeah, the council don't actually have your Bitcoin. What they have is piece of tangible property, the hard drive. But on that is just the password. So at best, all the council have swiped off you is just a hard drive. It's the same way that if you'd written this down on a piece of paper, your sort of private key, you could have written this on a piece of paper. That piece of paper wouldn't be the Bitcoin. It would just be a post-it note with a number on. So yes, the post-it note, the piece of paper has a physical existence, but the Bitcoin doesn't. So they said, well, the thing here is, you can't claim for the Bitcoin because the Bitcoin still exists. What you're asking for is you just want this physical object back. But they said the problem for you there is, no matter how you describe these claims, and they said basically, yeah, restitution, that's a fairly straightforward one. Let's say, for instance, I accidentally give you something you're not entitled to. Well, I can ask for it back. Sometimes this is done in, we'll call it like unjust enrichment, something like that. I mean, let's say, for instance, you do go to the cash machine and it's broken, and you say, give me 20 quid, and it gives you 40 quid. You're not entitled to that other £20. Let's say, assuming it hasn't just knocked it off your balance, if it's, sent 2 notes out by accident, it's like, well, no, we've only knocked 20 quid off your account, so that other 20 quid is still ours, give it back. That's how restitution works. And that can be the same for if you accidentally get anybody's property. Say, for instance, you buy stolen goods. We have this thing, nemo dat. You cannot give what is not yours. So if you're unfortunate enough to buy stolen goods, because the person you bought them off had no right to them, they didn't have title to the goods. So by definition, they can't sell you. They can't pass on title to the goods because they didn't have it in the first place. And we used to have these ideas of things called market overt, where there were certain markets where so long as things were sold during the hours of daylight for a fair price, even if they were stolen goods, the person who bought them actually did have good title to them. That's all been abolished now. Still exists in Switzerland though. In Switzerland, if you buy something and nobody objects and comes forward within 5 years, it's yours even if it was actually stolen. And this is something that crops up a lot in art law with looted art, because you quite often see it being laundered through Switzerland. Because if you can sell it in Switzerland and nobody notices for 5 years, then the poor old person whose art it was that was originally stolen, they have lost it. I mean, they can still sue the person who sold it or who stole it from them and claim damages, but they can't get the property back. But we don't have that here. So, if he could claim title to the hard drive, he could argue and say, I want the hard drive back. However, the problem there is that the Control of Pollution Act literally says that anything delivered to the authority by another person in the course of using the facilities shall belong to the authority and may be dealt with accordingly. So in other words, if you take something to the rubbish tip, and they got into issues about whether he'd done it or his missus, it doesn't matter. Maybe he's got a claim against his missus. Obviously he wouldn't have. But the fact is, once you take something to the tip, it belongs to the council. You can't have it back. You have given it away. You have forfeited all your title, whether you've done that accidentally or not. With regards to the proprietary equitable claim, they said, we can't even understand what this is. You just pleaded this as a cause of action. And the judge was a bit a bit sceptical. And he said, I can't help but think, because obviously when you're resisting an application for strikeout summary judgment, it's always quite a good thing to say, well, there's an issue here that's quite complicated, so it needs to go to trial. And that's what they were arguing to say, well, look, this claim is quite a complicated trail, so it needs to claim, so it needs to go to trial. And the judge said, yeah, nice try. You can't just make things up. I must confess, one of my favourite judgments, this was one of my animal rights thing, where we were going for an animal personhood thing, and the judgment actually contained the phrase, Mr. Robertshaw seeks to argue a cause of action unknown to English law. Narrator's voice, it's still unknown. That was the one where the judge said, just to clarify, Mr. Robertshaw, this is a claim on behalf of a dog. So, well, technically it's a claim on behalf of a dog's estate. So, well, I'm not sure that makes it any better for you. But it was very, very lovely, very sympathetic judge, because it was, like I say, it was a backdoor animal personhood claim. We were trying to argue that effectively dogs were people. I mean, as the judge said, very sad, he said, obviously to the real claimants, the human claimants. He said Bailey was obviously a much loved and much missed family member, but as far as the law's concerned, he was a dishwasher. But, you know, this is the whole thing about property. So once you hand something over to the council, once you drop something off at the tip, it's theirs. So be very careful, because if you do accidentally throw something away, you can't get it back. I mean, we've been chatting about this, and somebody said it is a bit unfair, because let's say somebody steals something off you and runs away and just hides it over, you know, the fence into one of the skips at the tip, and you're just 30 seconds behind. Technically speaking, you've lost that. I mean, I'm sure in practice, if you could sort of go, that's mine, I'm sure they'd let you take it back. But yeah, so it's very interesting. So yeah, his claim was struck out. So I don't know what he's going to do now. I mean, I suppose the moral of this story is if you do have £600 million worth, because that's what he said, apparently that's what the Bitcoin is now worth. It's worth over £600 million. If you do have £600 million worth of Bitcoin, maybe, I mean, I'll be honest, if I had £600 million worth of Bitcoin, I'd have the password tattooed on me. And then somebody could like steal my arm probably. But there you go, a cautionary tale. So be very, very careful what you throw out. But I hope, as always, hope you found that vaguely interesting, vaguely informative, vaguely accurate, vaguely amusing. Not for that poor guy, obviously. But yeah, just to get away from all the sort of semi-political stuff. Not that that's not interesting, and like I say, I'm just pulling my faces for the thumbnail. I mean, this one will get about like 4 views because it's actually just boring law. But I don't care because I just enjoy doing these for you.